This podcast is brought to you by the Prospect Research Institute, where researchers come to learn, innovate, and connect.
Focus on tracking. Learn your data elements first, and then begin to work with gift officers to understand how those elements work for them, how important they are to them, and help them through the process.
Welcome to Prospect Research Chat Bites, a podcast by and for prospect research professionals. I'm Jennifer Filla. Today, I'm talking with Greene, founder of Greene Consulting and formerly senior consultant and principal at Martz & Lundy. Hello, Karen. Thank you for joining me today on Chat Bites.
Hi, Jen. It's good to be here with you today.
So, Karen, I've worked with you for a number of years at Martz & Lundy, but it wasn't until I went through your LinkedIn profile preparing for this interview that I realized what a wild and accomplished career you've had. I'm wondering if you'll take a minute before we dive into prospect management and share how you got started, what brought you into research, and a little bit about what you're doing right now.
Well, I just like I think a number of people who come into the field, I needed a job. My husband was in the service, and we relocated to San Diego, and I wanted to work on getting a master's degree. So I said I'm going to get a job at a university, and I looked around, and there was a job open in development. I was familiar with development. I had worked at a rare book research library that had a development office, and my background is in history, and so I like people. I like doing stories about people, so I applied for this job at Prospect Research and was lucky enough to get offered the position, and that's what got me started many years ago, and fell in love with the work. And my husband's career, he retired from the service, and then that's when my development career really took off, and I sort of progressed from being a researcher to a senior researcher to a director, and then was attracted to the consulting world and went into consulting for a number of years. After got really excited about up with one of my clients and went to work at one of my clients and started working in operations. And that's when development operations really kind of started to kind of be a field. Did that for a number of years, different places, and then decided I was finally at that point where I really wanted to go do consulting. And so I've been doing consulting now for about starting my 8th year here at Martz & Lundy. And I work with clients all over the country on campaign consulting, operational consulting. I still do a lot of prospect research and prospect management consulting. In fact, huge need for that as the pandemic. There's been a lot of focus on making sure processes are really strong, and prospect management being one of the most critical ones. So I'm glad we're talking about that today.
Yes, I am really thankful to be able to ask you questions about prospect management. It is on the minds of many. And the first thing that comes to me when I think about it, I know that a lot of students, a lot of participants that come to the Prospect Research Institute are like the first researcher on staff, or the first one that they bring on board because they're worried about gift officer portfolios. They talk about putting people in the pipeline, and this is all fresh to somebody. They have to figure it out. And I think it's funny, they hire them brand new without experience and then say, hey, go do this. And it's such an important task. Do you have advice for folks who fall into that role like that?
Well, ironically, that was my first duties when I started in prospect research. Now, I did start in an office with 2 other people, so I wasn't by myself in the sense of being in prospect research, but my first job was all about prospect management. And so I kind of got dumped into that deep end very quickly. So I would say it's prospect management is probably the thing that takes the most time to learn. You can learn how to do research, right? And you've got some capabilities of knowing how to do some research already. So there's that piece of it. And then finding prospects, you can kind of figure out some ways to find prospects. But that art of prospect management, I think, does take a little bit of time about how to help gift officers, how to help them be focused. So you've got to, there's what I call prospect tracking and prospect management. Prospect tracking is the piece that most people kind of latch onto first. And that's really about all what I would call the data elements of prospect management. So what are the stages? When does somebody get assigned? What are the proposal stages? Are those different than the prospect stages? And, when do we put in a proposal and ask? And, what does it mean? And all the different elements. And depending on the database that you're working on, some of those processes can be a little bit different, but in essence, they're most systems allow for all the specific data to be captured. But so I would say the best place to think about is focus on tracking, learn your data elements first, and then begin to work with gift officers to understand how those elements work for them, how important they are to them, and help them through the process. The most important thing about prospect management is that it is a partnership with gift officers. I often get asked by vice presidents who has the best system of prospect management, and it isn't like there's a best system. What there is that makes it most effective is support by leadership. And if the VP believes in the prospect management system, then it happens and it occurs because the VP makes it important. And that focus is what really makes it a successful system. Because then the gift officers say, well, if it's important to the VP and the VP is doing this, then I need to be doing this. So I would say, don't get discouraged. It can be a little discouraging at times. It seems like there's a lot of elements to it. When I first started, I did all the prospect management changes. So I updated all the statuses. I updated all the stages. I did all the administrative support. And I think we have moved from, as a profession, from prospect research doing that as much. And we're more strategic now, and gift officers are encouraged to manage their own data, which I think is a pretty critical component. If they manage it, then it's important to them, and getting it right, they get it right. So those are the kind of things that I think can help as you start out.
So I heard you say two things. Your VP is your linchpin. And if that is not going well, it's probably, not so much your fault, but recognizing how important that VP support is. And then also that would you characterize it as messy? It's a people partnership. So there's going to be some back and forth and changes.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, if anything, and I think that what characterize prospect management is it is always about changes, and it is about being flexible and not getting so hung up on things having to be a set way. It's a different recipe every day and a different recipe for every person. But having said that, it's not wildly different. It's like, you go to my husband's favorite ice cream is vanilla. Well, if you go to the grocery store and you look at vanilla, you will see like 12 different kinds of vanilla. Home style vanilla, French vanilla, natural vanilla. And I'm like, oh my goodness, which vanilla does he want, right? And I just have to pick, right? And there's no right or wrong about it. And he'll tell me when I get home whether that's the right one or the wrong one. And if it was the wrong one, next time I don't pick that one, I pick a different one. And you just have to go with the flow quite a bit on those, and recognize you are dealing with people, and people change their minds too, and they change their perspective on things. And there's no right or wrong here. It's about making sure there's forward movement and what happens and what needs to happen to make that happen.
I love the ice cream analogy. I'm going to have to use that. I'll give you credit. That's great.
Okay.
So once people get started on that tracking, they're doing the database process, they're building the relationships with the development officers. The next thing they get asked often, and whether they're new or they're experienced, is like performance metrics. And that involves, of course, the development officer's performance metrics as well. I'm curious, in your experience, what's the researcher's typical role developing performance metrics? And are there some fundraising standards out there for setting them that they could go and say, hey, this is what so-and-so does, let's try this here?
I think that the metrics have become critically important. It's interesting because obviously when I started many years ago, metrics were not like, what are those, right? We're measuring what. And now they become more important. In fact, sometimes you have to watch that the metrics it becomes more about the metrics than it does about the work, right? And the work is really what we need to focus on. The metrics should be an outcome. And so I would say the metrics that we in how research should think about them is that you'll often be asked, like, what should a gift officer's portfolio be? How big should it be? And for a long time, 150 prospects was kind of the standard major gift officer portfolio. And then over the years, I think what we've discovered as a profession is that gift officers really aren't able to really manage that. They really can't create that many relationships and manage that many relationships. And so what I'm seeing in the industry is that it's scaling down to smaller numbers. I have some clients or organizations I work with that a portfolio for a major gift officer might be 75 prospects. Some are at 100, some are at 125, and I still have some that are at 150. I take some direction from one of Malcolm Gladwell's books in The Tipping Point, and he talks about, as an example, of Gore, the company that created Gore-Tex, and about how when they have reached production size or position size of 150 people on a team, they have determined that that's kind of the max size anybody can manage relationship wise. So after you are on a team of, let's say your team reaches 210 people, you don't know people's names, perhaps. You don't know their family information. You don't know if they've gone on vacation. So you start to lose connection. So if we take that as our direction, and that's something I've looked at and said, 150 really has to be max, because if this is what studies have shown, then why would fundraising be any different, right? There's no way you can really have good relationships and be effective as a fundraiser. So, if you have a portfolio of 75, as for a major gift officer, they need to be really great prospects. And this puts the added stress on prospect research, because now you're working not only with that metric of 75, but how do I make sure I'm getting them the very best 75? And the rule of thumb has been that a gift officer should have 20 to 25 solicitations in a year. And this is a major gift officer with no management or administrative responsibilities in the sense of managing others. And so let's say, most of their time can be focused on fundraising activities. If they're soliciting 20 to 25 people in a year or gifts, then they should have another 50 that they're working on for next year. So, and that's where the 75 comes from. So what you're really talking about with them is a portfolio that will actually be the focus that they put their attention to for this year and next year, so for 24 months. And then outside the 75 is where we would bring in the discovery. So what we're really saying is in the 75 is where we have cultivation and solicitation. And then outside of that group would be a qualifications or a discovery. And that might be another 25 to 50, but that's where research needs to have what we're calling in lots of places the ready pool or a holding pool, or, but we have prospects ready for them so that as they do those solicitations, they do those cultivations, and prospects fall out of those cycles, they have a new person to bring in that they can be growing for cultivation and solicitation 2 years from now. So we think of those metrics, like the other metric that we often hear that research gets, involved in, not necessarily held accountable for, is like how many visits should a gift officer have? And I have clients who organizations that work with any number of expectations between 10 every month, significant contacts, and this is all kind of pre-pandemic kind of numbers as well, but 10 a month to as many as 20 a month. And what we've seen is gift officers really can't do 20 a month. It's not usually achievable. So I would say a good number to search for or reach for is between 10 and 15 visits, and there's now this conversation about what are significant visits versus just visits. And so I think for a number of years in the field, we talk about moves and actions and contacts and visits. They are quite interchangeable. I know some people define them very differently and put different emphasis on them, but I look at them as relatively similar. But I think the word we've added to it is significant. So a significant contact is one in which you have moved the relationship along. In other words, it's a very strategic step that's being put forward and has managed to occur. Doesn't mean I'm not having visits or actions that with this prospect in addition to significant ones, but allows us to see, are we just having good actions or good visits, or are we actually moving this prospect along? And I think that's what we struggle as a profession to really understand how to measure and how to observe, and to see that pipeline actually has flow to it, and it's not a clog somewhere, or that we're not really moving prospects along like we would like to. So this is probably the biggest challenge, I think, for prospect management, for the field, and I would say, for all of fundraising. And no matter what size client I have or what size organization they are, how well they're endowed or not endowed, or how many gift officers they have, it's a challenge for every organization to be able to see into the pipeline and see what's really moving. And that's why metrics have become so focused on, because leadership really wants to know, are we really advancing relationships in the way we expect to?
Well, sure. And are we going to meet our goal?
Right.
People drop out for all kinds of reasons. Maybe someone dies or they get sick in the family, and that can't be forecasted, unfortunately.
Right. And so, what I like to work with researchers on is how they can work and partner with gift officers on understanding each gift officer's, I call it, churn rate. So some gift officers work relationships in a slower pattern or a slower pace than other gift officers do. And understanding how fast a gift officer goes through their pipeline helps you understand, is that a gift officer who is working it effectively, or are they working it too fast? Are they perhaps asking too quickly? Are they asking too slow? Are they asking too high? Are they not asking enough? So there's a lot of analysis really required in this particular part of our work that makes effective prospect management.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing those numbers and what they mean. And the way you put it helps to work into a metric. Like, here's what's possible and why. I love the way you broke it down. Thank you. Before I let you go, I'm curious if you have any resources or other places to go to learn more about this. What do you recommend for folks?
I think one of the things to think about is obviously, working through your professional networks, right? Others who are in the field, talking to them, whether that's through APRA or if you're in higher education through CASE or AFP, any other groups. The thing that I would like people to think about is that often there are some places that say things are best practice. And best practice means it's sort of an agreed upon idea by the profession, right? This is sort of general thinking. And it's something to be considered, but it doesn't mean you have to do that. There's a flexibility in this, and you have to create prospect management needs to reflect what your organization does and how your organization thinks. That's what I love about this particular aspect of the work, is that it may look like the same data elements and the same kind of guidelines, but how it rolls out and how it works is totally different in every organization. This is a very organic process. So don't take something someone did somewhere else and try to embed it into your organization. What I would say is adapt it to your organization, and understand the strengths of your organization and the culture of your organization. So when you look at best practices that might be published somewhere, or you read an article, or you talk to a colleague, think about, okay, that's what works well for them. Would that work for me in my organization? And test. I love talking to gift officers. Tell me about this. Tell me about that. My natural curiosity, I interview them about what works for them, what doesn't, and I ask them questions that might not seem very direct, because often I find by asking the indirect question, you actually get the piece of information you are hoping to find, and you find some really nice surprises what people will tell you when they're not thinking that they're telling you something.
Wow. So network with people and
Mm-hmm.
interview them to find out
Yes,
how you can adapt best practices.
absolutely.
Wonderful. Great advice. Thanks so much for joining me today, Karen, and sharing.
Well, thanks for having me, and happy prospect management to everybody.
That was Karen Greene, founder of Karen Greene Consulting and formerly senior consultant and principal at Martz & Lundy. Did you love hearing the backstory on prospect management performance metrics as much as I did? There is nothing better than when a consultant like Karen combines broad-based experience with history and delivers best practices you can adapt for use. Be sure to look in the show notes for the link to connect with Karen on LinkedIn. Hey, if you enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come check out the Prospect Research Institute's learning community. It's a membership community with powerful resources, great discussions, and comprehensive courses. Check it out at member.prospectresearchinstitute.org. I'd love to have you join me as a member of the learning community. See you there.